Radio Disney was a massive powerhouse of music in the 2000s. From hit tracks like Potential Breakup Song, which has been a certified banger after all this time, to influencing a decade of movement within music through shows like Hannah Montana, Sunny with the Chance, and Austin and Ally. Let me just tell you that this era of Disney was hands down the best era because they didn't just focus on creating the next hit through movies like High School Musical. They would use radio play to push more mainstream pop artists like Aaron Carter, who for sure made 2000s fun and gave the #1 artist of today's time, otherwise known as Taylor Swift, an outlet for success. One of the coolest things to come out of this era was that Radio Disney was such an influence that some of the artists featured would be used in video games like Thrillville Off the Rails, which was, and still is to be honest, one of my favorite theme park / roller coaster tycoon games. Now, Disney is no exception into pushing musical talents for decades, but it always catered to younger audiences. However, after Radio Disney became airplay and was a major part of Disney's brand, it gave birth to a lot of genres and pop artists we hear today. With the ever-changing industry and cable cutting becoming the norm, Radio Disney would become motionless waves. Was this due to how accessible streaming was becoming, or was it because pop culture had shifted? Radio Disney would not only reshape pop culture, it would be the bread and butter to hit shows and movies of the 2000s. From that catchy intro jingle to Wizards of Waverly Place, because everything is not what it seems, to big bops under films like Camp Rock, it seemed like Disney held the airwaves as well as trends. Now, like I stated before, Disney is obviously known for music because of animated films like Snow White that revolutionized the massive industry of musical fantasy. However, Disney would push the industry even further in the mid-90s after the acquisition of ABC, but the two would actually work together for decades before, seeing the potential through radio shows. This would lead to Radio Disney being introduced to the public at the end of the 90s, which was also a massive boom for music discovery. Internet was becoming more accessible, and satellite radio showed consumers a different world of tones. By the mid-2000s, Radio Disney would be obsessed with broadcasting worldwide that it would lead to music videos being showcased on Disney Channel during commercial breaks. This would be where I found Keke Palmer's track Keep It Movin', which showcased good summer vibes, and this also introduced other hit artists of that time that were outside of Disney. The movement that Radio Disney was pushing in the mid-2000s was one of the biggest events, which gave way to successful hit shows and millions in merch, which gave fans a new way to see success. There was not a place in the 2000s that Radio Disney was not plastered all over. The advertising and promotion was insane, but what was more insane was all the music behind it. I really want to start off this part of my video by presenting the first ever Radio Disney track that I heard, which was Disney's version of Mambo No. 5. Obviously, that song was not suited for youth consumption, but through Radio Disney's version, it would twist the lyrics into mentioning Mickey, Pluto, Minnie, and Daisy. This clever lyrical play wasn't what made Radio Disney so successful, as the mid-2000s is what people remember the most to be the banger that it was. Radio Disney would introduce a whole new way of making sitcoms entertaining, but also push the boundaries on the music industry. Now, we can't mention Radio Disney without the success of Hannah Montana or Miley, but the most unique thing to come out of this era of Disney was its push of artists under major genres of the time like pop punk, pop, and country. Now, while writing the script for this video, I totally forgot to mention that there were other cultures that were presented under Radio Disney, like Latin culture. I really just wanted to point that out. But you could catch a music video of Here We Go Again by Demi Lovato on Disney Channel, or if you tuned into Radio Disney on XM Radio, you could catch bops from Green Day. The level of what Radio Disney was on was so unique because it ranged from youth-friendly jams to more mainstream and teeny bopper hits. I remember around this time, I was more interested in catching what music video was going to be showcased next on Disney Channel because it wasn't always that Mickey Mouse vibe. But as the 2010s would shadow the 2000s, Radio Disney would see a decline, leaving it to fade after the 2020s. Even though Radio Disney would see award shows and the uprise of popularity within country in the early to mid 2010s, it could not change what was happening in the industry. Music was becoming more accessible through platforms like YouTube or Vivo and even Spotify. But the Disney Channel sitcoms that Radio Disney had seen success from were on the edge of being repetitive disasters. I have to mention that taking a look back at what the 2010s was with Disney, you could see that the writing for sitcoms like Austin and Ally had been lacking, and it was harder to compete with older hits. Cable, satellite TV, and radio waves, which Radio Disney used so heavily, were in an evolution phase as streaming was becoming the norm. This would lead to Disney launching Disney Plus at the end of the 2010s, and by the 2020s, Radio Disney would be dropped totally as part of this new venture. With how massive Radio Disney was, it would be gone in an instant, which was just sad to see, but people were shifting to more convenience, and Radio Disney wasn't on the table for that transition. The 2000s brought some of the most unique ways to discover music, and Radio Disney was that culture. The Cheetah Girls, Lizzie McGuire, Corey in the House, and so many other titles all used the success that Radio Disney was putting out. Hell, even Disney XD, which appeared to be the more edgy side, used inspiration from this cultural shift. Radio Disney cannot be forgotten, as so many people look back at how impactful it was, like myself. A big part of why the 2000s fashion was so colorful was because of this era, and even looking back at website designs of Radio Disney, it still feels like the future. Feel of the future. Sorry. This video cannot express how crazy Radio Disney was. It even influenced that one phase of Disney stars making funny skits or Q&As on YouTube, and you just had to be there in the 2000s for that experience. But with that being said, maybe we could give future generations a glimpse of what we remember in the comments. Did you find artists like I did from Disney Channel commercial breaks? Or did you catch a glimpse of the fashion industry using Radio Disney vibes? Radio Disney still flexes on today's pop culture and will forever be nostalgia.